Also on the show, special reports. The North Korea crisis intensifies. Where is this brinkmanship leading the world? Ground reports from Guam and Washington coming up on the show. In Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif stirs the political pot with massive rallies in the stronghold of Punjab. Is the thrice ousted Prime Minister working towards a fourth term? Another Prime Minister who faces the biggest political crisis of his life, Benjamin Netanyahu, faces massive corruption charges. Will he be forced to go? And a president whose imminent re-election has sparked violence. Kenya fears a repeat of 2007 after the opposition rejects initial results. 7 lakh eggs and counting. That's how big the tainted eggs scandal has become in Europe. Dutch investigators detained 2 rotten eggs. People, we'll get you more on that. And what do international army games look like? Fantastic when India beats China in a tank race. Stay tuned for that one. But first, we're looking at what's happening in Nepal. The BIMSTEC foreign ministers meeting in Kathmandu has opened with India's Sushma Swaraj participating. But amid all the talk of building economic linkages and furthering technical cooperation in a range of areas, the India-China standoff on Bhutan's Doklam Plateau is expected to figure majorly in the discussions. Of BIMSTEC's 7 members, 4 India, Myanmar, Bhutan and Nepal share borders with China. India and China have had prickly ties going back decades. Myanmar, while dependent on China, is seeking ways to limit that dependence. Bhutan has no official ties with China, while Nepal has in recent years opened its doors to China, seeking to balance its dependence on India. These dynamics are expected to play out during Sushma Swaraj's parleys with her BIMSTEC counterparts. Swaraj explaining India's reasons for intervening in what is actually a dispute between Bhutan and China on the desolate Doklam Plateau. Ironically, hosts Nepal, with the strongest ties to India and encompassing people, culture and enduring faith, may be the toughest nut to crack for China. This is because, as some Nepalis say, of an undeclared war being waged in the Himalayan nation, a war for influence pitting India's considerable hard and soft power against China's political muscle, which all too often translates into money power. Take a look at these facts. Nepal has signed onto China's One Belt, One Road program. China and Nepal are coordinating policy on economic development. China is working on Nepal's roads and railways. There are plans for trade transit agreement and dry ports in border areas. Chinese banks will open in Nepal shortly and payment can be made in yuan. For these and other reasons, Nepal has been circumspect about commenting on the Doklam standoff. Foreign Minister Krishna Bahadur Mahara made clear his country's desire to remain neutral. He said, and I quote, "Nepal will not get dragged into this or that side in the border dispute. Some media reports are attempting to drag us in favor of one or the other side, but I want to make it clear that we have not taken any side in this matter." That's what the Nepalese foreign minister said. India will find Nepal's stand difficult to accept, understandably. The India-Nepal border is open. More than 1 million Nepalis live and work in India. Around 65,000 Gurkhas are in the Indian army. But politics makes for strange bedfellows. In the case of Bhutan, it is the aggrieved party in the Doklam standoff and on Thursday dismissed a Chinese claim that the plateau was Chinese territory. A statement from Thimphu shortly after the Chinese attempts to build a road through the plateau was stopped, said, and I quote, "Recently, the Chinese army started construction of a road towards the Bhutanese army camp in Doklam area, which is in violation of an agreement between the two countries. Since then, the Bhutanese have maintained silence, as has India, which has been circumspect in its comments, where the Chinese have gone over the top with threats and attempts to intimidate." Myanmar has said nothing in public, although quiet support to India may have been conveyed. Sri Lanka, for one, has said nothing, given that it is more than $1 billion in debt to the Chinese. Thailand has said nothing officially. The silence of neighbors underscores that India is alone in this standoff. But her refusal to back down in the face of a bigger neighbor is the first by any country since China began muscle flexing in the South China Sea. And joining us this evening, Harsh V. Pant, Distinguished Fellow and Head of the ORF's Strategic Studies Program with us from New Delhi. Ramesh Ramachandran, Senior International Correspondent of WION. He is in Kathmandu, bringing us all the very latest from there. And Ram Sharan Mahat, former Finance Minister of Nepal, will also be joining us from Kathmandu. Good evening to all of you. Ramesh, let's first come to you and take us through what happened today, the highlights of the day, who all Sushma Swaraj met and what came out of those meetings.
The two-day BIMSTEC summit, but to my mind, the Doklam standoff tends to overshadow all the deliberations here on the margins of the BIMSTEC summit. All eyes were on the foreign ministers of India and Bhutan in particular, given the standoff on the Doklam plateau. And just very quickly, Palki, although they did shake hands and exchange pleasantries on the margins of the inauguration of the BIMSTEC summit just hours ago, tomorrow they are expected to hold a separate one-on-one bilateral meeting, and that, to my mind, will hold the key to deciphering or decoding where the relationship, by that I mean India-Bhutan relationship vis-a-vis China, goes from here onwards.
Right. Harsh, the Chinese Vice Premier Wang Yang will be visiting Nepal on the 14th of August. And Sushma Swaraj is there right now as we speak. This is days before Nepali Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba comes to India. Is this schedule coincidental according to you?
With China, there is exchange of visits between the two countries. The timing is, fixed. Based on consultation between the two sides, which has nothing to do with the politics, India-China relation or China-India relation. So it is based on the convenience, mutual convenience of the concerned parties.
Okay, this was a question for Harsh V. Pant actually. What should be read into these almost back-to-back meetings, Harsh?
Well, these are very important meetings in many ways for various reasons. I think BIMSTEC in itself is important for India because India has been trying to marginalize Pakistan in the SAARC region. But I think what is happening in Doklam and what is happening to India and Bhutan relations, Nepal's role becomes very critical in how India deals with China, how Nepal decides to engage with India at this crucial juncture. So I think we are looking at a flurry of activities here, diplomatic and political, both I think symbolically important but also substantively important, to give a sense to the region and to China in particular that I think there are certain issues on which there is convergence, and Nepal's role becomes critical in that larger context. So I do think that there is a larger scheme to these visits, though these visits would have been planned much in advance. But I think what is happening now gives you a sense that all these three countries, Bhutan, India and Nepal, are working towards some sort of a concerted response to what is happening in Doklam.
Ram Sharan Mahat, Kathmandu knows very well, as does the world, that if this Doklam standoff escalates, it will affect Nepal's life and economy adversely. Can Nepal get away by saying we are not going to take sides?
You see, Doklam issue is a trilateral issue between China, India and Bhutan. Nepal is a close neighbor, so is Bangladesh. So if anything happens there, it will affect the whole subcontinent and even beyond that. So we want this problem to be resolved peacefully. We expect peaceful resolution of this problem through mutual consultation and dialogue, particularly between the two big neighbors, India and China, because this is a trilateral issue and should be resolved trilaterally.
Ramesh, I'm looking at reports on how Nepal has been engaged or how China has tried to engage Nepal. The former Prime Minister, who's seen as a pro-China leader, KP Oli, was recently reportedly invited to Lhasa, apparently briefed about the Chinese position in Doklam and given the message that China respected the sovereignty of both Nepal and Bhutan. What have you heard on this, and how does India see China's overtures to Nepal?
Well, Palki, I can very easily draw 2 or 3 inferences or conclusions based on the developments between and among India, Nepal and Bhutan relations over the last months or years now. First, the competition or the rivalry between India and China to expand their respective spheres of influence in their own backyards is affecting or putting a strain on India's neighborhood first policy. That's number one. Number two is the silence, the deafening silence, some would call it, on the part of smaller neighbors, countries such as Nepal and Bhutan. Now, is the silence deliberate or is it by default? We cannot put a finger on the on it just yet. But the fact remains, I spoke to both the Bhutanese foreign minister and the Nepalese foreign secretary, and both maintained a stoic silence on the issue of Doklam. Like I said, is it deliberate or default? I don't know yet. The third quick point is that when you talk about the regional security context and architecture, only earlier today we saw reports emerging from the East Asia, where the U.S. destroyer has been sent into the South China Sea to question China's claims on the South China Sea. And to my mind, one could interpret it as a joint effort, if you will, or an exercise in tandem between India and the U.S. to challenge, to question, to confront China's authority or claims on the land boundary at Doklam and on the maritime boundary in the South China Sea.
Harsh, China has been trying to engage with Bhutan in a bilateral dialogue, we know that, over the border issue while keeping India out. How should New Delhi see Bhutan's studied silence then?
Well, I think, as I think your correspondent pointed out earlier, it's a very difficult situation for smaller neighbors because you have these two big powers competing for influence. And Bhutan's role, in fact, has been very precarious because Bhutan did issue a statement early on, and Chinese have been using psychological warfare to present a picture from Bhutan. In fact, they told a delegation of Indian journalists just 2 days back that Bhutan has conceded their point of view, which I don't think it has. So I think they are trying to pressurize Bhutan in ways that perhaps India cannot, given India's historical and cultural ties. So I think India would be better advised to take it easy with Bhutan, and because Bhutan is facing a problem that perhaps it does not want on its borders. So I think eventually it will have to decide. But I think behind the scenes, there are intense negotiations going on between Bhutan and India to sort of present a concerted picture insofar as China is concerned. So eventually, I think Bhutanese will have to take an explicit position. So far, they have not done that, but that is to be expected.
Ram Sharat Mehit, what is at stake for Nepal here? Is it hoping to revise agreements like the Lipukle agreement along the Kalapani Trijunction between India, China and Nepal?
You see, we have already held the views that Lipu Lake is a tri-junction. You know, Nepal's border starts from Lipu Lake and Kalapani is part of Nepal. We have differences with India on the border. There are two important points, this Kalapani issue, including Lipu Lake and Sushta. These are the two places where we have differences with China over the border issues, and these are the pending issues between the two countries. This should be resolved to mutual satisfaction as early as possible, so that there is no, dispute over the territory. As far as Nepal's attitude with China, we want to have friendly relation with China. It is also a big neighbor with a long border, and we have extensive relations, social, cultural, and political relations with China. So we want to have best of relations with with both countries. And when we talk of increasing the sphere of influence, that we don't like. It is not a question of sphere of influence. Nepal is a sovereign country, wants to maintain its independent status. We appreciate and we understand the extensive relations we have with India, and also at the same time we want to have best of relation with China. We want to maintain friendliest relations, and we want further economic cooperation, connectivity, and all these between the two countries. We don't want to be sandwiched between the rivalry of the two countries.
Ramesh, let me wrap up this discussion with this final question to you then. I know in diplomacy a lot more happens than meets the eye, but what can be expected to be achieved, if that's the right word, from Sushma Swaraj's visit to Nepal?
Well, to begin with, Palki, this is the first high-visibility meeting between Indian and Bhutanese leaders after 16th of June, when the Dokulam standoff began. So to that extent, this is important, significant, and it'll give an opportunity for both sides to exchange ideas, thoughts, and concerns going forward as well. But very quickly, Palki, to my mind, it's a classic small country, big neighbor syndrome insofar as both Nepal and Bhutan are concerned. Nobody, especially Nepal, as Dr. Mahat said, would not like to be pushed into taking sides, into pitting one against the other. But that said, Bhutanese are also equally insistent that they would not want to see an escalation of hostilities or tensions because of the Dokulam standoff. They want that both sides should, enable both sides to have a face saver, if you will, going forward. So they do not want to provoke China or India any further beyond what they might have done already. And that, to my mind, is crucial in understanding the Bhutanese mindset or position insofar as in the specific instance of Doklam is concerned.
Right. Ramesh Ramachandran, Harshvi Pant and Ram Sharan Meher, thank you very much for joining us. India has lost goodwill in Nepal. There is no doubt about it. But can it be assured of Nepal's support on this issue? That question remains. We're taking a break. Still ahead on the show, the leaders dismiss the threats from the other side. But what about the people? We take stock of the situation in Guam and the Korean Peninsula.